Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Well, gang, we have a very, very, very different kind of a show for you today. You've heard of the Shroud of Turin? Well, we are going to do a little bit further investigation into the shroud. Evidently, there is more there than meets the eye. We have someone today who has investigated the shroud and has come up with some, should I say, startling evidence about a little hint left in the shroud itself. And we have Dr. Gilbert Lavoie with us, and he's written a book about this, The Shroud of Jesus and the Sign of John. That's the Apostle John. Now, folks, the shroud, it's in Turin, and that's in Italy, and it's shown every 10 years, something like that. Dr. Lavoie will fill us in on that. And there have been many questions about the shroud over the years. You know, it appeared in the Middle Ages. It all of a sudden just appeared, and to this day there's controversy about the shroud. When it's displayed, scientists have looked at it. They say, well, could be, during the time of Jesus, maybe after the time of Jesus, but nobody can figure out how they made the impression on the shroud, and it certainly seems to be miraculous. So we're going to ask Dr. Lavoie to give us some background on the shroud and then tell us about his investigation. Dr. Lavoie, welcome to our program, and maybe you could help us with so many questions and then tell us the surprise that you found.
Well, Father Michael, it's a pleasure to be here with you and have this opportunity to have a little chat regarding the Shroud of Jesus. I basically, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and when I started many years ago, from a physician's perspective, I was a skeptic. However, when I went in 1978 to see the shroud, it was the first time it had been shown since about 1933, and there were about 3 million people that went at that time. It was quite a beautiful event, and I came back and I was fascinated by it, and I met a number of people with regard to the studies that were studying the shroud. There was a big group of scientists that were over there, and over the years I got to know many of those men, and they became friends and colleagues.
You're a medical doctor, correct?
Yes, I'm a medical doctor, physician, right. And so when I studied, I looked at there was a blood mark that was off the elbow. It was an off-image blood mark, and I was fascinated by that. And I spent about 3 years trying to figure out how that happened. And finally one day I decided I had a replica of the shroud given to me, or lent to me, I should say, by a colleague of mine. It happened to be a priest who I met in Turin at the time. And I placed the shroud over myself, and in doing so, I realized how that blood mark got there. And that blood mark definitely shows us that the man of the shroud was crucified. He died in the crucified position. And that's what really got me started, where I really said, this is real, this is a man. Plus the fact that blood mark also showed that all the blood marks in the shroud sort of give you height and width, but this particular blood mark gave you depth. It went actually around the body, and you could tell that there was a three-dimensional body under there, plus the fact that the body was actually that it died in a crucified position. So that got me going. That blood mark also shows that the blood the blood is simply a contact process, which is a very natural process. Blood touching moist blood spots, and but the image, because there is no image along the side, we know the cloth touched the side of the body, so the back of the arm, that yet there's no image of the back of the arm. So we know very much that the image itself is not a contact process, and no one knows how this image got onto the cloth.
Could I ask you, Doctor, when we see the shroud, you're talking about a blood clot, and the rest of the shroud, it's not blood, is it? What is it?
That's a good question. Just for people in your audience, the shroud is really a cloth that's 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. And on that cloth are the sort of the faint image of the front and back of a naked man. And that naked man has gone through, from the blood marks, we see that man went through all the what we read about in the Gospel of John. Everything that you read about in the Gospel of John, you find on the shroud, and everything you find on the shroud, you see in the Gospel of John. It's so the blood marks. The blood is truly blood. It's been investigated, and we know that it's blood. Plus the fact that from a forensic perspective, it's definitely that of a crucified man, which really affirms the fact that this is blood, human blood. But the image itself is really on the very topmost of the cloth being a flax material, linen, and it's made up of all these small fibers, and the fibers are actually less than half the diameters of the hairs on your head. So it's that the depth of which this image goes in is really 1 to 2 of those fibers into the cloth, and no one has been able to reproduce that from a microscopic perspective. It's never been done, even with the technology we have today. So that's been a major mystery of how this happened. People have theories, hypotheses, and in my book, The Shroud of Jesus, I point to to places where people can actually look and study these different hypotheses. But my book really deals with what you can actually see from a point of view of the blood marks, and also from the point of view of the anatomy of the man of the shroud.
Doctor, am I mistaken? But I believe I read that when they tested the shroud, the linen, that it was determined that it was from Palestine back in the year 33.
Right. There's been controversy about it, and that's what you were saying earlier. There was a carbon dating study done around 1988, and that stated that the cloth was actually a 14th century artifact. But however, there's been work done, and the statistics of that have been examined in 2019, and a study came out showing that those statistics really do not give us a date. And in order to have a date with carbon dating, one would have to do the test again. So that is really basically an invalid test. However, there are wonderful studies that have shown that the cloth is basically from Jerusalem area and actually from that time. There's a long strip. First of all, we have archaeological data. If you just by studying the cloth itself, there's a long strip that is about 2 or 3, maybe 3-4 inches wide that goes the entire length of the cloth, and we know that cloth was sewed on to the main cloth at the time that the cloth was used originally, because it's the very same herringbone weave cloth that's the strip as well as the larger piece of cloth. So now the amazing thing was that when they did the study, they repaired the shroud in 2002. Florrie Lumberg, who is a woman who did the work, she studied the stitch that was used to stitch the two pieces together. And that stitch is very unique in that it's only been found in Masada, Masada is a city that was destroyed by the Romans around 73 AD. So it gives us a place and a time, and that's only about a 2 to 3 day walk from Jerusalem. nowhere else in the world that stitch has ever been found.
Isn't it also true, Doctor? I believe someplace somebody studied the shroud and said that there was pollen on the shroud that came from that time period too.
Well, I met the man, Dr. Max Fry. I met him in 1978. And what you have there is you have really an itinerary of where this cloth has been through the study of the pollen. I remember meeting him and he was telling me how he had actually spent about 5 years of his free time studying, different. He was a microscopist as well, and sort of an investigator, and he studied and compared the pollens of different places in the world where this pollen was located. He found pollen, of course, from France and Italy, but there was pollen also from the Jerusalem area, which was unique to that particular area. With that, we really know where the shroud has been. Now, just of late,
but it showed up though, Doctor. A lot of people have questions and say to me, "Yeah, but where was it? I mean, it didn't show up till the 14th century in Europe."
Yeah, it was in Europe. It was in 1350s. The shroud was brought to in Liry, France. That's where it first came about in the West. But of course, we have a history of it. Sparse history, but a definite history of it that was also in the East, and so we know it goes way back. And
another question, Doctor, that comes up: could it have been some other man that was crucified in a similar manner to Jesus?
Yeah, one could hypothesize that, but the fact is that the details are so much exactly with it would be very hard for anybody that had no knowledge of medicine to reduplicate what you actually see there in the shroud, especially from the point of view of the spear wound, the blood coming out on the side, blood and water. All of these details be very hard for somebody who didn't understand all of that to duplicate what you see there. So that it's amazing that. And that brings us to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, it's almost, if from a forensic perspective, one has to say that John knew about this cloth. He had to have known about it. He had to have seen. He describes the crucifixion and the scourging, etc., in such great detail that all these details are found on the shroud. So that, number one, that brings you to believing that very much so that John was aware of this. There's a big question of why no one ever mentioned an image on the cloth, in the Gospels, and that's very easily answered. I answer that, in fact, in my book, because when you actually, if you study the mission of the Torah and so forth, you discover that the people at that time, the Jewish people, would not allow anything that had an image on it would be considered something idolatrous, and it would be destroyed. So there is no way that John could have spoken about that, because he knew that if he did say something, it would be sought out and destroyed. So
Doctor, could I ask you this? Is the shroud, with this impression, if you will, of the crucified Jesus, we'll say it's Jesus, is it just that it is an impression from the human body, the whatever chemicals come forth from the body after death, or is it because of the cosmic event of the resurrection that this impression was left?
Yeah, there's no question that it isn't the organic matter and so forth that would have been on a man who's been crucified that was transferred over to cloth, creating this image. We know that for sure because we just talked about the fact that we know the cloth touched the side of the arm where it picked up the blood mark on the side of the arm, and there was no image there. So it's definitely not a contact process. And plus the fact that now, as far as how it happened, I had my doubts. In other words, I had studied the cloth for a number of years. I did a lot of work with regard to the blood marks and understood a number of them, and have written about them. And of course, you'd find them in my book, The Shroud of Jesus. But the situation is that the shroud itself, how did it get on there? People believe that we're saying that it was the moment of the resurrection. However, I never found anything on there that could definitely tell me that this was the moment of the resurrection, other than this being a magnificent picture of a man lying down. However, a number of years ago, as I was doing work on a blood mark that was on the cloth, I discovered something, and that's one of a big part of my book, is I discovered that the man of the shroud, the blood marks are consistent. Let me put it this way: the blood marks are consistent with a man who was crucified. Then his body he was laid supine on one end of a long cloth. The other end was placed over his body. And those marks are totally consistent with that as far as the blood marks. But what I discovered was that the image is not that of a man lying down in supine, but that the image is that of an upright man, that he's literally upright. He's not as if he was lifted up in midair. And when I discovered that, it was an awesome moment for me. You might say an epiphany. I was so struck by it, but I literally backed out of the room from where they had photographs of the shroud. I was just so amazed.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events. Hi, I'm BC Cloutier, president of Action for Life. As you can imagine, producing this program is quite an expensive endeavor, and we would appreciate your contributions in any amount. If you'd like to support the program, please visit actionforlife.org and click on the donate button. Again, it's that simple, actionforlife.org. Thank you, and God bless.
Our thought for the day: I hope that all of you have Bibles in your home. The Bible is the Word of God, and there's nothing more powerful than God's Word. Keep it in a prominent place to remind you that you are part of God's good news and that God is using you to do His will. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So YouTube and you make a fine couple. People often ask, they say, that I believe with John's Gospel, where they say that Peter and John went to the tomb and they found the cloth rolled up, but the headpiece was someplace else. And they asked me, is that the shroud? What's that?
Well, some people believe that's the cloth Boviedo, which is a cloth that was used, that they associate with the shroud. Because that's a totally different subject, which requires another meeting of talking about the cloth of Oviedo.
We'll have to do it.
Pardon?
Well, I guess we're going to have to do it. What's the
No,
word? What's the word you just used? So that way our audience could understand what you're talking about.
Well, cloth of Oviedo is a cloth that has some blood marks on it and some sort of serum from pleural fluid and so forth that's on that cloth. And it's in Oviedo, Spain. That's why it's called that. And it was used likely when Jesus was on the cross. They probably, and he was dying, had died. They probably put that over his head to probably catch the fluid that was coming from him. And then when they brought him down, they took that off and they buried him. That cloth.
Now, Oviedo is in Italy.
No, it's in Spain.
Spain, okay.
Yeah, Oviedo, Spain. And it's not something that I spend very much time on because it really, I think it's interesting. I think it's a fascinating piece, but it's not where I spent my time. Is really on the shroud itself.
Okay. So these are two separate things we're talking about.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
two separate
Okay,
things.
folks.
That would be-
Two separate things, folks. That way, we're not confused when we read the gospel that, the cloth from the head was one place and the cloth from the body was someplace else. The shroud is separate from that. Okay, great.
So we have a cloth, right? And the fascinating thing is that there was a controversy with regard to whether or not this was the shroud of Jesus, because the body was supposed to be when you read the Mishnah, and which is an old Jewish book way back, it covers the time of Jesus and whatever. That book tells you that that the body of Jesus, or the body of a person, should be washed. And anyway, it turns out that people thought, well, if the body of Jesus was washed and he was buried according to the Jewish custom, therefore we have blood on this body, so therefore it can't be the body of Jesus. The other people that believed that it was the body of Jesus, they said, well, there wasn't time to do the washing, so they simply just buried him they had no time because the Sabbath was imminent. However, in the work that I've done, I studied the Jewish burial customs and found out there's an exception to the rule of washing. And the exception is that if a man dies a violent death, and the blood that flows at the time of death has to be buried with the body. So the body is fully wrapped. So what you actually see in the shroud is correct. When John said he was buried according to the Jewish custom, that was the Jewish custom.
Listen, folks, this is amazing. Father O has been around, did a little bit of study on some of these issues. I never knew that. Thank you.
Right.
Doctor,
Yes, well,
I want to get to the point, though, where you said there's a special sign that John left on the shroud. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, that would be literally the upright man of the shroud. This is what I was discussing, that the body, his body, blood marks are that of a man lying down, but the image is that of a man literally lifted up with his hair falls to his shoulders, down his back, his entire back. If you walk into, a lot of people just pay attention to the front of the shroud. And if you go around the world looking at sculptures of the image of the man of the shroud, they always have him lying down. But God didn't create when God created this sculpture, with this image, created a front and he created a back, the full body, the front and back of the man of the shroud. And if you would follow me into an autopsy room and turn over the body of a person who's died, you would find that their bodies, their back, the buttocks and legs and whatever are flat, just flattened right out. And on the shroud, when you look at the shroud, you don't see these areas, these sort of big gray round areas of flattening. You see form. So the back of the man of the shroud, when you study that, you have form as if he's upright. There's a big difference between one life, even in life. And what I did is, again, in the book, The Shroud of Jesus, that I published, just published by Sophia, you will see, I took a man and I had him lying on glass, and you could see all the flattening of the whole back of the body, plus the hair and so forth.
So this is resurrection you're talking about, that the body sat up?
So I'm saying that I'm saying to you that the body is consistent with a man who is upright.
How about, hey folks, this is fantastic. I mean, we're kind of getting, almost scientific proof into the resurrection. Doctor, this is a fantastic study that you've done. I hope that the listening and viewing audience will make an attempt to get Dr. Lavoie's book. Doctor, closing statement from you. What would you say to our folks listening about the Shroud of Turin and the faith that it engenders?
Well, I think that this cloth, I think God is actually communicating to us visually through this shroud. He's communicating that his son died a terrible death, was laid out in burial, but that he raised him up on that last day. He lifted him up. And so Jesus predicts this. He predicted this event. He said, remember in the temple and so forth, he's telling people, shoving people out, get out of, what are you doing in my Father's house and so forth. And he was asked for a sign. And the sign was, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.
Hey, folks, this is fantastic. I could listen to Dr. Lavoie, for like forever on this topic. Hey, folks, get the book. Dr. Lavoie's for action. I'm for action, and I know you are too.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.